We spend a lot of time sometimes trying to avoid the things that we fear. You know, there are a lot of common fears out there. For example, if somebody is afraid of heights, they avoid getting on ladders. They avoid doing things that would cause them to be put in that kind of a situation. There are a number of people who are afraid of a lot of different things. But one of the things that we find that people are afraid of is death. You know, we spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money on health, trying to figure out how to prolong our life, how to avoid death at all cost. Death is that very thing that we're going to be dealing with. Death, that which the Bible calls an enemy, is that which we're going to see Jesus taking on as we continue our series and looking at, or really wrap up our series, looking at the 7 signs in the book of John. Now, this isn't the final sign that points to who Jesus is in the book of John. It's just the last in the typical listing of the 7 that you have. We know that his own resurrection is what puts an exclamation point. But in that list of 7, the resurrection of Lazarus is the final of those, the final that's typically listed, and that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. It's the power that Jesus has over life and death itself. Looking at another of the signs that points to just who Jesus is, his true identity, that which the Apostle John has been writing about all the way through his gospel to show exactly, without question, who he is. This text in John chapter 11 shows Jesus for who he is, the authority he has, the power that he has, very clearly. John chapter 11, if you'll read with me, beginning in verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was Mary who had anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So the sisters sent word to him, saying, Lord, behold, him whom you love is sick. But when Jesus heard this, he said, This sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. And so we see Jesus getting news that his friend is sick. But the way that Jesus responds to getting this news, there's a few things that really seem, well, if you haven't read the rest of the chapter, it seems a little bit odd. A few of the things that he says and the things that he does, it's, what's going on with his reaction? What's going on with what he says here? Verse 4, he gives his commentary on the situation seems a bit strange. When Jesus heard this, he said, This sickness is not to end in death. Seems a bit odd because if we're familiar at all with John chapter 11, we know the next thing we hear is that, well, Lazarus has died. This sickness is not to end in death. What are you talking about? Lazarus is, in our text, is getting ready to die. What do you mean by that, Jesus? Another situation that will lead to the glory of God. This is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified by it. It's another situation where he takes opportunity. It's opportunity for him to show another aspect of his identity and his authority and his power. But verse 6 is also a bit strange as well. Here's some people that he loves, a family that he loves, 2 sisters and a brother that he cares about, that he has a relationship with. They send word, Come, our brother is sick. So he waited 2 days before he did anything. You hear somebody is sick and it's this serious, we're afraid somebody's going to die. He's sick. We drop everything and we run. We want to get there as fast as we can. He hears what's going on and he waits 2 more days. What's going on with all of this? His initial reaction in this chapter seems really strange. Now we pick up our reading in verse 11. This he said, after that he'd said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to him that I may awaken him out of sleep. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he was speaking of literal sleep. So Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. Let us go to him. Another kind of an odd statement that we have here. Jesus waits to travel until Lazarus has already died, before he goes to where he is. But notice there, Lazarus is dead, and then he says, I'm glad we weren't there. That seems completely backwards from what we would typically think of here's some people that we love, here's a family that we love, let's go be with them, let's get there as quickly as we can. Jesus says, I'm glad we weren't there. But notice he gives purpose. So that you may believe. The stated purpose for John's gospel, this thing that we see coming up again and again throughout the book. Belief. And we'll look later on in chapter 20 where John states his purpose for writing is belief. And Jesus is saying, I'm glad we weren't there so that you may believe. We're going to see how this death can bring about a belief, or a stronger belief, can help to fulfill the purpose for which John writes, the thing that Jesus is trying to accomplish. And so in the next section, Jesus travels and he has some conversations with Martha and Mary. We're going to read specifically what he says there with Martha, beginning in verse 21. Martha says, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. We see that same thing coming up down in verse 32 with Mary. Mary came to where Jesus was. She saw him. She fell at his feet. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. What took you so long? Why didn't you come when we notified you? Why didn't you come whenever we called you? If you'd been here, this wouldn't have happened. If you'd been here, you could have stopped it. If you'd have been here, things would be better. Jesus, why didn't you come? Martha said to him, verse 21, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. Jesus is calling Martha to a deeper belief. I know that you're the Christ. And she said, and he says to her, your brother will rise again. She said, I know he's going to rise at the end of time. I know he's going to rise at the end. What kind of consolation is that? I miss him right now. And she's missed what Jesus is trying to get across to her. He's calling her to a deeper level of belief. He's getting ready to demonstrate very clearly who he is. That the resurrection isn't just a distant promise, but Jesus is the embodiment of it. He has power over life and death itself. John begins his gospel. Chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. Notice verse 4, in him was life. The life was the light of men. In him was life. Paul would say in Colossians that in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. He's the creator in bodily form. He's the creator in the flesh, the one who gives life in the flesh. Or as he would say before Abraham was born, I am. What he tells Martha here, I am the resurrection and the life. She says, I know he'll rise at the end. He says, I am the resurrection. He is the living, breathing embodiment of the resurrection standing there. And she confesses belief in him as the Messiah, a wonderful confession. But she still hasn't realized the significance of what Jesus has said to her, as we're going to see momentarily. He calls her to a belief. Do you believe? But then he's going to call them in a more significant way in the next section. Do you really? picking up in verse 38. So Jesus, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, "Remove the stone." Do you really believe? Well, it's one thing to say, yeah, I know he'll rise at the end. I know you're the Christ. I believe in you. I know that God will do whatever you ask. It's another thing to remove the stone. Do you really believe? Then open the tomb up. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, "Lord, by now there'll be a stench. He's been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" When they took Jesus to the tomb, he commanded them to remove the stone. And her response, she hasn't fully grasped his statement, "I am the resurrection and the life." She hasn't grasped what he's trying to get across. He stinks. He's been in there 4 days. This isn't dignified. This isn't the way things are done. Lord, we can't do that. And so he challenges her again. Didn't I tell you if you believe, you'll see God's glory? Do you really believe, Martha? Do you really believe who I am? He reiterates the importance of belief, to trust him in everything. And he convinces them in verses 41 and 42 to remove the stone. They removed the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me." He convinces them to remove the stone. And notice the words in Jesus' prayer, coming back to the purpose of the Gospel of John, the purpose of the signs, what this is all about. So that they may believe that you've sent me. It's all about belief, all about trust, all about putting faith in him. And Jesus demonstrates in verses 43 and 44 just who he really is. When he'd said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth!" And if there's anybody standing there who wasn't really sure who this Jesus guy is, what happens next? Well, it should be enough to convince anyone. Because Lazarus, who's been in the tomb for 4 days, Lazarus, who's been dead long enough that his body would have already been decomposing, Lazarus, whose body would have had a smell coming off of it, begins to breathe again. He comes out of that tomb. He comes out of death. The man who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings. His face was wrapped around with a cloth. And Jesus said, "Unbind him and let him go." He demonstrates that he is the creator, the giver of life, that in him is life, that he is the resurrection and the life, that he has power over life and death itself. He proves who he is when he says, "Lazarus, come forth." Father, I thank you that you've heard me, so they may believe. I'm glad I wasn't there for your sake, so you may believe. John says, these have been written so that you may believe and have life in his name. He's the only one that can give life, the only one that can give eternal life. And here he demonstrates that he has that ability, that he has that authority. And it gives credibility to the claim that he's made a few chapters earlier in John 5, 28 and 29. Don't marvel at this. An hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come forth. Those who did good deeds to a resurrection of life, and those who committed the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment. The power of the words of Jesus can bring the dead back to life. I appreciate the way our brother Bob Stump put this in the last week or two. He was talking about this on Wednesday night, and he asked the question, does anybody know why Jesus said, "Lazarus, come forth," rather than just "come forth"? Because if he'd have just said "come forth," everybody would have woke up. He has the ability to do that. Lazarus, come forth. And that dead, decaying body obeyed. Lazarus came back to life. And we see in what follows the result of this sign. We'll pick our reading back up in verse 45. It says, "Therefore many of the Jews who had came to Mary saw what he had done and believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus had done." And so you see here what's been going on throughout the Gospel of John, a growing belief that every time he does one of these signs, somebody believes in him. But then you also see the part of those who have hard hearts, that they can see the power of God demonstrated right before them, and they become more determined. We've got to get rid of this guy. You see a growing disbelief on the part of those who've already made their minds up. You've got some that see it and they recognize this is God in the flesh and they believe in him. And you have others who go, "Oh, this can't be happening. We got to get rid of this guy." Imagine saying we've got to get rid of this guy about someone who has just called a dead man out of the tomb successfully. Therefore, the chief priests, verse 47, the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council and were saying, "What are we doing? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him. The Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was a high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it's expedient that one man should die for the people and that the whole nation not perish." He did not say this of his own initiative, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather into one the children of God who were scattered abroad. From that day on, they planned together to kill him. Think about that for just a minute. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him. Go on like what? Feeding people. Providing for people. Turning water into wine. Healing. If we let him go on like this, everybody's going to believe in him. Here's a guy who can multiply food miraculously, who can raise the dead. We got to get rid of this guy. You see the growing disbelief in the Jewish leaders as he shows clearly who he really is. They become more determined to do away with him. They don't deny, you see here, they're not denying the authenticity of his signs, but they're so focused on their own status that they missed the one who is standing right before them. They miss the authority that he has. They miss the implications of what he's just done. They miss that only God can do what he's doing. In John chapter 5 and verse 44, Jesus asked the Jewish leaders the question, "How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that's from the one and only God?" They're so focused on glory that comes from man. They're so focused on the attention that comes from others that they're not focused on God's approval and God's glory. They're so focused on one thing that they miss the one that has the power and the authority of God, who's right there before them. The purpose of the book. John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. It says, "Many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book." This isn't a comprehensive, the things that we've looked at over the past several weeks, it's not comprehensive of the miracles that Jesus did that point to his true identity. But John has carefully selected these to point to who Jesus is. But these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. The purpose of the signs that we've looked at the last several weeks is to bring people to belief and ultimately to bring people to eternal life as they believe in him. When we look at the one who can turn water into wine, who can with a word heal someone some 15 miles away, who can heal a man who couldn't walk for 38 years, and feed 5,000 with one boy's sack lunch. The one who can walk on water, can suspend the power of nature, or the laws of nature. The one who can heal blindness, and the one who has power over life and death itself. These are written so that you may believe and have life in His name. He has the power to provide. He has the power to heal. He has the power to calm fears. He has the power to open our eyes. He has the power to give eternal life. But what do you believe about Him? Because that's really the question that this comes down to. That's what's significant. What do you believe about Him? Because you see, if we're going to have life through Him, we have to believe in Him. Put our trust in Him. But putting our trust in Him, I'd like to ask you to go back to John 11 one more time as we conclude. It means taking some difficult steps. Before Jesus went to the tomb, it's easy to cast blame. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Or as Martha confessed, I believe you're the Christ, the Son of God, He who comes into the world. It's one thing to say it. But putting belief and putting trust in Him goes beyond making the claim, yes, I believe that He is the Christ. Jesus called him to back it up. The goal of belief is that we'll line our life up with Him. The goal of belief, if we really believe, we're going to do what He says. We're going to do what it takes to be united with Him so that we can have eternal life. We're going to be willing to obey Him even when it's really difficult. They took Jesus out to the tomb, and He said, remove the stone. The claim to belief doesn't mean anything until they're ready to roll the stone away. The claim to believe in Jesus doesn't mean anything until you change your life to follow after Him. The claim to believe that He is the Christ doesn't mean anything until you give yourself to Him. Do you really believe in Him? If you do, then it means you have to do something about it. That's where life comes from. When we are united with Jesus, we have life in His name. Do you believe that He'll forgive? And turn your sin over to Him. Turn away from your sin. And come be united with Him in the waters of baptism to have those sins washed away. Do you really believe in Him? Then begin a walk with Him by being united with Him. As a Christian, do you really believe in Him, but you're holding on to something that He wouldn't approve of? If you really believe in Him, let's give over all of our life to Him. Even those parts that we like to hold back sometimes. Or if as a Christian maybe you've wandered away, if you really believe in Him, we invite you to return to Him this morning. To come back to Him, making Him your priority. He is our victory over death because He's defeated sin. Do you believe in Him? Because it's only when we really believe in Him enough to take action that we have life in His name. If you need to come to Him this morning to be united with Him, to express a belief through obeying Him and being united with Him, we would be glad to assist you in that this morning. Or if you need to return to Him, we would be glad to pray for you and encourage you as you come back to Him today. If we can help you in some way, we ask that you would come while we stand and while we sing.